All right, let's get right into it. We all think we know the Declaration of Independence. We see it as this monumental, historical document, a manifesto, maybe even a breakup letter to a king. But what if I told you there's a clue hidden right there in plain sight, right at the top? It's a tiny detail, so easy to just read right past, but it tells a huge story about the country America was originally meant to be. Take a close look at this famous line. See anything off? The word united has a lowercase u. Now that's kind of weird, right? In the very name of a brand new country, you've got States of America all capitalized, but united isn't. So what's the deal? Was this just a simple typo, a slip of the pen in a hurry, or was it something much more deliberate, a clue that actually reveals a fundamental truth about what the founders were trying to build? Well, this very question is the key to understanding America's first and mostly forgotten attempt at a government. You see, most of us imagine this straight line from signing the Declaration in 1776 right to George Washington becoming president. But there's this big 13-year gap in between. This was the era of what we're calling United States 1.0, the first version of the country, and understanding why it failed is absolutely essential to understanding the government we have today. That lowercase u tells the whole story. United wasn't part of the name, it was just a description. These were 13 independent states that happened to be united in their goal to break from Britain. Their first government, under the Articles of Confederation, wasn't designed to create a single nation at all. In their own words, it was a firm league of friendship. You have to remember, they had just fought a war against a powerful, distant government. The last thing they wanted was to create another one. And you can see this incredible power imbalance right here. The individual states, they held all the cards. They could levy taxes, control their own trade. They were basically acting like 13 small, independent countries. And the Central Congress? Well, it was more like the UN. It could ask the states for money, but it couldn't make them pay. It could try to mediate disputes, but it had zero power to enforce its decisions. On paper, this was exactly what they'd fought for: total independence for each state. In reality, though, this League of Friendship pretty quickly turned into a total mess. The whole experiment began to crumble, leading to this cascade of failures that threatened to undo everything the revolution had accomplished. And things fell apart fast. States started slapping taxes on each other's goods, sparking these nasty little trade wars. Maryland and Virginia were practically at each other's throats over who controlled the Potomac River. Out on the seas, American merchant ships were sitting ducks for pirates because there was no national navy to protect them. To top it all off, the British Army just refused to leave their forts on American soil, and the toothless Congress couldn't do a thing about it. It was broke, it was ignored, and then the whole thing boiled over when a farmers' rebellion in Massachusetts almost brought down a state government. The hero of the revolution, George Washington, was watching all of this from his retirement, and he was absolutely horrified. He started writing to his friends, saying they weren't the United States anymore. They were the disunited states. He felt they were becoming a total laughingstock, contemptible in the eyes of Europe. It was a complete and utter national humiliation. And if you want a perfect snapshot of just how broken this system was, look no further than 1786. Leaders called for this emergency conference in Annapolis, Maryland, to try and fix the crippling trade issues. They invited all 13 states. How many bothered to show up? Just 5. Not even half. The League of Friendship was officially a total bust. But sometimes failure is the best teacher. This crisis forced the founders back to the drawing board. A new convention was called in Philadelphia, but this time it wasn't about tweaking the old system. No, they were there to build an entirely new one, based on the very hard lessons they had just learned from the collapse of USA 1.0. And the Constitution that came out of this wasn't just some random collection of ideas. It was a direct answer to 3 specific, painful lessons. Lesson 1, a central government that's too weak is a recipe for disaster. Lesson 2, if you're going to create a government with real power, you have to design it so it can't turn into a monarchy. And lesson 3, they learned that pure, direct democracy, what they worriedly called mob rule, could be incredibly dangerous. So the first fix was also the most radical. They completely threw out the League of Friendship. In its place, they created a real national government, one that could tax citizens directly, raise a national army, and regulate trade between the states. No more state-on-state trade wars, no more begging for money. This government was going to have actual teeth.
Okay, but that created a huge new problem. How do you give a government real power without it just becoming a new king? I mean, that was a central fear that started the revolution in the first place. Their solution was, frankly, brilliant. Don't put all that power in one person's hands. Spread it out. So, they took the core functions of any government and split them into three distinct pieces. You have the power to write the laws, the power to enforce those laws, and the power to interpret the laws. And they gave each of those powers to a separate, co-equal branch. This separation of powers was their ultimate defense against tyranny. And here's the basic breakdown. The legislative branch, that's Congress, makes the laws. The executive branch, led by the president, carries out those laws. And the judicial branch, the Supreme Court, settles any arguments about what the laws mean. Each one has its own job, and this is the crucial part. Each branch has ways to check the power of the other two, making sure no single part becomes too dominant. The final lesson really came from scary moments like Shays Rebellion. The founders, who were mostly wealthy, elite men, were pretty skeptical of what they called the passions of the people. They were terrified that an angry mob, acting on impulse, could just tear the whole system down. So they felt the government needed to be insulated, buffered from those temporary passions. So they built these filters, these buffers, right into the system. Sure, the House of Representatives was the most direct link to the people, with elections every 2 years. But the Senate? That was a step removed, 6-year terms, and senators were originally chosen by state legislatures, not by the people. The president was chosen indirectly through the Electoral College, and Supreme Court justices? They're appointed for life to shield them completely from the political winds. It's a republic, for sure, but a very filtered version of democracy, and that was entirely by design. So, after a long, hot summer of debate in Philadelphia, they finally came out with this new blueprint. But let's not make the mistake of thinking it was some perfect document that everyone loved. It was a messy, deeply controversial compromise, born out of a crisis and designed to balance a lot of conflicting fears. A lot of people weren't on board. In fact, Edmund Randolph, the very guy who introduced the plan to scrap the old system, ended up refusing to sign the final constitution. Why? He was afraid this new, powerful central government contained the fetus of monarchy. He thought they had gone way too far and had created the very monster they just fought a war to escape. But here's what might be the most brilliant part. Its creators knew it wasn't perfect. They knew the world would change in ways they couldn't even imagine, and that their system would have to adapt to survive. So they built an instruction manual right into it for how to change it, the amendment process. It was this incredible admission of their own fallibility. And they had to use that process almost immediately. To quiet the fears of people like Edmund Randolph, they quickly added 10 amendments, what we now call the Bill of Rights. These amendments didn't give more power to the government. They did the opposite. They put strict limits on it, explicitly protecting individual liberties like speech and religion from this new, powerful federal government. It was basically the first major software patch to the new operating system. Which brings us to a final thought. This system, USA 2.0, was forged in the fires of failure. It was a series of compromises designed to manage these two competing nightmares, the fear of anarchy on one side and the fear of tyranny on the other. It's now been running for over 230 years through civil war, depression, and massive cultural change. So the question for all of us today is, how does this old blueprint, born from crisis and compromise, continue to endure?